fear inside.
What would you do if you were working alone at a gas station at 3:07 in the morning and a man walked through the front door who had been dead for 23 years? Daniel Carter thought he was dealing with a simple mistake when the stranger asked about a room that didn't exist. But by sunrise, Daniel would discover that the stranger wasn't looking for a room at all. He was looking for the person who had killed him. Daniel had worked the overnight shift at Black Pine Gas and Mart for almost 3 years, and he knew the place better than anyone. The old refrigerators rattled every 20 minutes. The front door sometimes opened because of a faulty sensor, and the security cameras occasionally froze during heavy rain. Nothing surprised him anymore, until that night. At 3:07 a.m., Daniel was cleaning the coffee machine when the front door opened. He looked toward the entrance, expecting to see a customer, but there was nobody there. Outside, a thick fog covered the parking lot. The highway beyond the gas station was completely empty. Then Daniel noticed someone standing beside pump number 6. A man wearing a brown jacket and an old baseball cap was staring directly at the store. Daniel hadn't heard a car arrive. The man slowly walked toward the entrance. The automatic doors opened, and he stepped inside without saying a word. Daniel watched him walk to the refrigerator, take a bottle of water, and place it on the counter. Daniel scanned it and said, "That'll be $2. The man didn't reach for his wallet. Instead, he looked directly at Daniel and asked, "Do you still have the room in the back?" Daniel frowned. "What room?" The man's expression remained completely emotionless. "The room behind the storage area." Daniel shook his head. "There's no room back there. Just storage." The man stared at him for several seconds. Then he smiled. "There used to be." Daniel felt a sudden chill. "Who are you?" The man didn't answer. He placed the bottle on the counter and walked back outside. Daniel immediately checked the security cameras. Camera 1 showed the parking lot, empty. Camera 2 showed the pumps, empty. Camera 3 showed the highway, empty. Daniel's heart began beating faster. He called his manager, Rick. Rick answered after several rings. "What's wrong?" Daniel explained what happened and described the man. There was a long silence. Then Rick asked, "Did he ask about the room?" Daniel froze. "Yes." "How did you know?" Rick's voice became quiet. "Daniel, if that man comes back, don't let him inside." Daniel looked toward the entrance. "Why?" Rick took a deep breath. "Because that man died here. 23 years earlier, a night shift employee named Michael Harris had disappeared from the same gas station. His body was discovered several days later beneath the wooden floor in the storage area after a small fire damaged the building. Police believed Michael had been killed during a robbery, but the case was never solved." Daniel stared at the storage room. Why would he ask about it? Rick didn't answer. Then Daniel heard 3 knocks coming from behind the storage door. Knock, knock, knock. He slowly turned around. The storage room was dark. "Rick, someone's back there." "Get out of the building," Rick said immediately. "Don't open that door." Daniel grabbed his jacket. Before he could leave, the front door opened again. The same man walked inside. This time, he was holding an old photograph. He placed it on the counter. Daniel picked it up. The photograph showed Black Pine Gas and Mart 23 years earlier. 3 men were standing outside. One was Michael Harris. Another was Rick's father. Daniel's stomach dropped when he recognized the third man. It was his own father. His father had died when Daniel was 11. "Where did you get this?" Daniel asked. The stranger looked at him. "Your father knew what happened." The light suddenly went out. Daniel heard footsteps behind him. Then a whisper came from the darkness. "Open the door." Emergency lights flickered on. The stranger was gone. Daniel ran to the security monitors. Camera 4 showed the storage room. Someone was standing inside. Daniel leaned closer to the screen. It was his father. He looked directly into the camera and raised one finger to his lips. Behind him stood Michael Harris. Daniel's phone rang. It was Rick. Daniel answered with trembling hands. Rick was crying. "Daniel, I lied to you," Daniel whispered. "What happened here?" Rick finally confessed. His father and Daniel's father had robbed the gas station years ago. Michael discovered what they had done and threatened to report them. They attacked him, locked him inside the storage room, and started a fire to destroy the evidence. But Michael didn't die immediately. He survived long enough to leave something behind. Daniel searched beneath the old floorboards and found a small metal box. Inside was Michael's wallet, his employee badge, and a handwritten confession naming the two men responsible. Daniel called the police. By sunrise, Black Pine Gas and Mart was surrounded by officers. But when police checked the security footage, something impossible appeared. Every camera showed Daniel working alone. There was no stranger, no Michael, no father. The only evidence was the photograph and the confession hidden beneath the floor. The gas station was closed permanently after the investigation. Daniel never worked another overnight shift. But 1 month later, while driving past the abandoned building, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The gas station was supposed to be completely empty. The pumps were covered. The windows were boarded shut. Yet the lights inside the store were glowing. Daniel stopped his car. Through the front window, he saw the same man in the brown jacket standing behind the counter. The stranger slowly raised his hand and pointed toward the clock above the entrance. It was 3:07 a.m. Daniel drove away. He never looked back, but when he reached home, his phone showed one new voicemail from an unknown number. He pressed play. At first there was only silence. Then came 3 slow knocks. Knock, knock, knock. A man's voice whispered, "Thank you for opening the door." If you ever find a woman standing alone in the middle of a deserted road after midnight, don't stop your car, no matter how badly she begs you for help. Emily Parker learned that lesson too late. She was driving home through northern Pennsylvania when she saw a woman standing beneath the headlights on County Road 9. The woman was completely dry, even though rain was pouring so heavily that Emily could barely see the road. And when Emily finally stopped to give her a ride, the woman whispered something that Emily would never forget. "Whatever happens, don't let him see you." It was almost midnight when Emily left her sister's house. She had driven this road dozens of times and knew the area well. County Road 9 passed through several miles of dense forest before reaching the highway. There were no houses for miles, no streetlights, no gas stations, nothing except trees and darkness. Emily was halfway home when her headlights suddenly caught a figure in the road. She slammed on the brakes. A woman stood directly in front of the car. Emily rolled down the window a few inches. "Are you okay?" The woman slowly walked toward the vehicle. She was wearing a long white dress, and her wet-looking hair covered most of her face. "I need a ride," she whispered. Emily hesitated. Every instinct told her to keep driving, but the woman looked terrified. "Where are you going?" Emily asked. The woman pointed down the road. Blackwater Bridge. Emily knew the bridge. It was an old wooden bridge several miles away that crossed a narrow river. "Get in," Emily said. The woman opened the passenger door and sat down. The moment she entered the car, Emily noticed something strange. There was not a single drop of rain on her clothes. Emily stared at her. "Were you standing out there long?" The woman didn't answer. She simply looked straight ahead. Emily started driving. For several minutes there was complete silence. Then the woman whispered, "Don't stop at the bridge." Emily looked at her. "Why?" The woman slowly turned toward her. Her face was extremely pale. "Because he's waiting there." Emily's hands tightened around the steering wheel. "Who?" The woman looked toward the back seat. Emily checked the rearview mirror. Nothing was there. Then she heard a soft knock from behind her. Knock, knock, knock. Emily looked back again. The back seat was empty. She turned toward the woman. The passenger seat was empty too. Emily slammed on the brakes. Her car stopped in the middle of the road. She looked around in disbelief. The doors were still locked. The windows were closed. There was no possible way the woman could have left. Then Emily noticed something on the passenger seat. A wet handprint. She grabbed her phone and called 911. A police officer named James Miller arrived about 15 minutes later. Emily explained everything. James listened carefully, then asked her to describe the woman. When Emily finished, James didn't speak for several seconds. "Are you sure?" he finally asked. "Yes." James looked toward the forest. Her name was Sarah Collins. Emily's heart began racing. "How do you know her?" James told her that Sarah had disappeared on County Road 9 11 years earlier. She had been driving home from work when her car was found abandoned near Blackwater Bridge. Her body was never recovered. Emily looked at the passenger seat. "Then who was in my car?" James didn't answer. Instead, he asked her to step away from the vehicle. He walked around the car and opened the trunk. His expression immediately changed. "What?" Emily asked. James didn't respond. He pointed inside. There were 4 deep scratches on the inside of the trunk lid. They looked as though someone had desperately tried to escape. James called another officer. While they examined the vehicle, Emily stood beside the road. Then she heard a woman's voice behind her. "Don't let him see you." Emily turned around. Nobody was there. "Sarah," she whispered. The forest remained silent. Suddenly, the police radio crackled. An officer's voice came through. "James, we found something." James walked toward the bridge with Emily following behind him. Beneath the bridge, they found an old car covered in mud and leaves. The license plate belonged to Sarah Collins. But the car looked almost brand new despite sitting there for 11 years. Inside the vehicle was a photograph of Sarah standing beside another man. James recognized him immediately. "That's Thomas Reed." Emily asked. "Who is he?" James said. "Sarah's fiancé." Police had questioned Thomas after Sarah disappeared, but he claimed he had never seen her that night. James suddenly looked at Emily. "Your car wasn't randomly chosen." Emily didn't understand. "What do you mean?" James pointed toward her passenger window. A small symbol had been drawn into the fogged glass from the inside. It looked like a circle with a line through the center. James recognized it from the old case files. Sarah had drawn the exact same symbol on the wall of her apartment the night before she disappeared. They returned to the police station and reopened the case. Investigators discovered that Thomas had lied about his whereabouts 11 years earlier. He had been near Blackwater Bridge on the night Sarah vanished. But there was one problem. Thomas had died 2 years ago. Emily thought the nightmare was finally over. It wasn't. 3 nights later, she woke up at 2:14 a.m. because someone was knocking on her bedroom window. She lived on the 2nd floor. There was no balcony outside. She slowly approached the window. A woman's face appeared on the other side of the glass. It was Sarah. Emily couldn't breathe. Sarah raised one finger to her lips. Then she pointed behind Emily. Emily turned around. Nothing was there. When she looked back at the window, Sarah was gone. but written across the glass from the outside were 4 words: "He is still here." Emily called James immediately. He arrived within minutes. They searched the house but found nothing. Then James noticed something on Emily's bedroom floor: muddy footprints. They started at the window and continued across the room, but they didn't lead toward the door. They stopped directly behind Emily's bed. James slowly moved the bed away from the wall. Behind it was the same symbol from Sarah's apartment, and beneath the symbol was a name carved into the wall: Thomas Reed. The investigation eventually revealed the truth. Thomas had murdered Sarah 11 years earlier and hidden her car beneath the bridge, but Sarah's body was never found because Thomas had buried it somewhere else. Police searched his old property and eventually discovered her remains beneath the floor of an abandoned shed. Sarah's case was finally solved, but Emily never forgot what happened on County Road 9. She stopped driving at night. She never picked up strangers again, and according to James Miller, something strange still happens near Blackwater Bridge. Drivers occasionally report seeing a woman in a white dress standing in the road during heavy rain. They say she never asks for money. She never asks for food. She only points toward the bridge and whispers the same warning: "Don't stop here." And the people who ignore her warning sometimes hear 3 knocks coming from the trunk of their car before they reach home. What if you moved into a cheap apartment because you couldn't afford anything else, only to discover that the apartment above you had been empty for 11 years? That's exactly what happened to 26-year-old Ethan Walker. And the strangest part wasn't the footsteps he heard every night. It wasn't the furniture moving upstairs. It wasn't even the voice that sometimes whispered his name through the ceiling. The terrifying part was that when Ethan finally entered the apartment above him, he discovered something that made him realize someone had been living there the entire time. Ethan moved into an old apartment building in Cleveland, Ohio in October. The building was called Westmore Apartments, a 6-story brick building that had clearly seen better days. The rent was cheap, the neighborhood was quiet, and Ethan desperately needed a place after moving to the city for work. His apartment was 4B. Directly above him was apartment 5B. During the first week, Ethan noticed footsteps coming from the ceiling every night around 2:30 a.m. At first, he assumed someone had moved into 5B. But when Ethan asked the building manager, an older man named Harold, he received a strange answer: "Nobody lives there." Ethan laughed. "I can hear someone walking around every night." Harold looked uncomfortable. The apartment has been empty for years. Ethan thought he was joking, but Harold wasn't. 5B hasn't been rented since 2015. Ethan went upstairs and looked at the door. A thick layer of dust covered the handle. The apartment was clearly locked. That night, the footsteps returned. Ethan lay in bed listening. Step, step, step. Someone was walking slowly across the floor above him. Then the footsteps stopped directly above his bed. Ethan stared at the ceiling. A few seconds later, something scratched across the floor. Then came a whisper. "Ethan." He froze. Nobody in the building knew his name except the manager. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, he complained to Harold. Harold became serious. "If you hear your name again, don't answer." Ethan asked why. Harold refused to explain. Over the next several nights, things became worse. Every night at 2:30, the footsteps returned. Sometimes Ethan heard a chair being dragged across the floor. Sometimes he heard a woman crying. One night he heard someone knocking on the floor above him. 3 knocks, then 3 more. Ethan decided to record it. He placed his phone on the table and went to bed. At exactly 2:30 a.m., the footsteps began. Ethan listened from his bed. Step, step, step. Then the footsteps stopped. His phone suddenly played a recording notification. Ethan looked at the screen. The recording was still running. Then he heard his own voice coming from the phone. "Ethan, don't look up." Ethan hadn't said those words. He slowly looked toward the ceiling. A dark stain had appeared above his bed. It was spreading across the plaster. Then something pressed against the ceiling from above. 5 fingers. Ethan ran out of the apartment. Harold was standing in the hallway as if he'd been waiting for him. "You heard it again?" Harold said. Ethan demanded answers. Harold finally told him what happened in 5B. 11 years earlier, a woman named Laura Bennett had lived there with her 8-year-old daughter, Mia. One night, neighbors heard screaming. Police entered the apartment the next morning and found Laura dead. Mia was missing. She was never found. The apartment was sealed after the investigation. Ethan asked, "Then why do I hear someone upstairs?" Harold looked at him. Because Mia was never found. Ethan couldn't accept it. The next day, he searched public records and discovered something disturbing. Laura's death had never been officially solved. The police believed she had been murdered, but there was no evidence showing who had killed her. That night, Ethan stayed awake with his lights on. At 2:30 a.m., the footsteps began again. But this time they weren't above him. They were inside his apartment. Ethan slowly turned toward the hallway. A child's footsteps moved across the floor. Tap, tap, tap. They stopped outside his bedroom. A small voice whispered, "He is upstairs." Ethan grabbed his phone and called Harold. Harold answered immediately, "Leave the building." "Who's upstairs?" Ethan asked. Harold's voice trembled. "Nobody." "Then why does she keep saying someone is upstairs?" Harold didn't answer. Ethan looked toward the ceiling. A loud thump came from apartment 5B, then another, then another. Ethan grabbed a flashlight and ran upstairs. The door to 5B was locked, but when he touched the handle, it opened. Inside, the apartment was completely dark. There was no furniture, no electricity, nothing. Except a small wooden chair in the middle of the living room. Ethan stepped inside. The door closed behind him. On the wall were dozens of photographs. Every photograph showed the same apartment building. But the pictures weren't old. Some had been taken only days earlier. Ethan looked closer. One photograph showed himself sleeping in his apartment. Another showed him standing in the hallway. Another showed him looking at the ceiling. Someone had been watching him. Then Ethan noticed the final photograph. It showed him standing inside apartment 5B, but the picture had been taken from behind him. Ethan slowly turned around. A tall man was standing in the corner. His face was hidden in darkness. Ethan couldn't move. The man whispered, "You shouldn't have come upstairs." Ethan ran toward the door. The man followed. Ethan escaped down the stairs and called the police. Officers searched 5B but found no man. However, they discovered a hidden room behind the bedroom wall. Inside were boxes filled with photographs, newspaper clippings, and personal belongings belonging to former residents of the building. They also found a child's pink backpack. Police reopened the old case. The evidence eventually revealed that Laura's landlord had been secretly entering apartments and spying on tenants for years. On the night Laura died, he had entered 5B after discovering that Laura had caught him. Mia had witnessed the murder. The landlord kidnapped her and hid her in another property. Mia had survived and was eventually found living under a different identity years later. The building was closed after the investigation. Ethan moved away immediately, but months later, he received a package with no return address. Inside was a photograph. It showed apartment 4B, Ethan's old apartment. The photograph had been taken from the hallway. On the back were 4 words written in black ink. "You forgot about me." Ethan never returned to Cleveland. But according to the current tenants of Westmore Apartments, Footsteps can still be heard above apartment 4B every night at exactly 2:30 a.m. And sometimes, when the building is completely silent, residents hear a child whispering from the ceiling, "Don't look up." What would you do if you rented a house and discovered a locked room that didn't exist on the original blueprint? What if you heard someone crying behind that door every night, and when you finally opened it, you found a chair facing the wall with your name carved into it? That is what happened to 31-year-old Ryan Miller after he moved into an old farmhouse outside Asheville, North Carolina. Ryan had always wanted to live somewhere quiet. After years of living in a crowded apartment, he finally found a small farmhouse at the edge of the Blue Ridge Mountains. The rent was surprisingly cheap, and the owner, an elderly man named Walter, told him there was only one unusual thing about the house. "The basement door sticks sometimes," Walter said. "Don't force it." Ryan thought nothing of it. He moved in on a Friday afternoon. The house was old but comfortable. It had 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a living room, and a basement beneath the kitchen. That first night, Ryan slept peacefully. The second night, he woke up at 2:18 a.m. because he heard someone walking downstairs. He sat up and listened. Step, step, step. The footsteps were slow and heavy. Ryan grabbed his phone and turned on the flashlight. The sound suddenly stopped. He walked into the hallway and looked toward the basement door. It was closed. He opened it and switched on the light. The basement was empty. There were old boxes, a broken washing machine, and a wooden staircase leading down to the concrete floor. Ryan searched the room but found nothing. He went back to bed. The following night, the footsteps returned. This time they were followed by a quiet crying sound. Ryan stood at the top of the stairs. "Hello?" The crying stopped. Then a woman's voice whispered from the darkness, "Please don't leave me." Ryan froze. He immediately closed the basement door. The next morning, he called Walter. Was there ever a woman living here? Walter was silent for several seconds. "Why do you ask?" Ryan explained what he heard. Walter finally said, "Old houses make strange noises. Don't worry about it." Ryan wasn't convinced. He searched the history of the property online and discovered that a woman named Rebecca Hayes had disappeared from the farmhouse 27 years earlier. She had been living there with her husband, Thomas. According to the newspaper article, police had searched the property but found no body and no evidence of foul play. Ryan looked at the article again. Something bothered him. The photograph of the farmhouse showed the building exactly as it looked today. But there was one difference. In the old photograph, there was a small window on the basement wall. Ryan went downstairs and checked the wall. There was no window. Instead, there was a section of brickwork that looked newer than the rest. That night, Ryan couldn't sleep. At 2:18 a.m., the footsteps started again. This time they were coming from behind the brick wall. Ryan slowly approached it. Then he heard 3 knocks. Knock, knock, knock. He stepped back. Another 3 knocks followed. Then the woman's voice whispered, "Ryan!" He nearly dropped his phone. "How do you know my name?" Silence. Then she whispered, "He told me." Ryan ran upstairs and locked himself in his bedroom. The next morning he drove to the county records office. He found the original blueprint of the farmhouse. There was supposed to be a small room behind the basement wall. Ryan stared at the document. The room had been removed from the newer plans. He returned home before sunset and called Walter. "There is a room behind the basement wall." Walter didn't answer. "Who was Rebecca Hayes?" Ryan asked. Finally, Walter said, "You need to leave that house. Why?" "Because Rebecca wasn't the only person who disappeared there." Ryan's heart stopped. Walter admitted that 3 people had disappeared from the property over the last 30 years. None of them had been found. Ryan packed a bag, but before he could leave, he heard a loud crash from the basement. He grabbed a flashlight and went downstairs. Part of the brick wall had collapsed. Behind it was a narrow wooden door. Ryan stared at it. The door had no handle. There was only a small keyhole. Then he noticed something on the floor, an old brass key. He picked it up. The key fit perfectly. Ryan unlocked the door. It opened slowly. Behind it was a small room covered in dust. There was a wooden chair in the center. On the wall were dozens of names. Some were old, some were recent. Ryan moved closer. The newest name was his, Ryan Miller. Beneath it was a date, tomorrow's date. Ryan's hands began shaking. He turned toward the chair. Someone had carved another message into the wood. "Sit down." Ryan backed away. Then the door slammed shut behind him. He tried the handle. It wouldn't move. A woman's voice whispered from the darkness, "He's coming." Ryan heard footsteps outside the room. Slow footsteps. Step, step, step. They stopped directly outside the door. Then a man's voice said, "Rebecca, you brought me another one." Ryan screamed and kicked the door. It finally opened. He ran upstairs and out of the house without taking anything. He drove directly to the police station and told them everything. Officers returned to the farmhouse with Ryan. They opened the hidden room and discovered old photographs, clothing, jewelry, and personal belongings belonging to the missing people. They also found human remains buried beneath the floor. Rebecca Hayes was among them. The investigation revealed that Thomas Hayes had murdered Rebecca and several other people over the years, hiding their bodies inside the secret room. But Thomas had disappeared before police could arrest him. He was never found. Ryan moved out that same day. The farmhouse was eventually demolished. Months later, Ryan thought he had finally left the nightmare behind. Then, one night, while staying at a hotel in another state, he woke up at 2:18 a.m. There was a knock on his hotel room door. Ryan didn't move. Another knock came. Then a woman's voice whispered from the hallway, "Please don't leave me." Ryan looked at the bottom of the door. A shadow was standing outside, but there was something impossible about it. The shadow belonged to a man. Ryan stepped away from the door. His phone suddenly lit up with a message from an unknown number. It contained only one photograph. The photograph showed Ryan asleep in his hotel room, and beneath it were 3 words. "You opened it."
Thank you for watching Fear Inside.